will come to order. I am pleased to welcome you all to our last event for this year. The motion under debate today is this House will restrict romantic relationships between university students who study within the same academic institution. Representing the government are the Prime Minister, Angela Shenyun, the Deputy Prime Minister, Stephen Castanda, the Government Whip, Prince Bajao, the Government Reply, Lucy Fenn.
Speaking for the opposition, the Leader of the Opposition, April Shi. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Daniel Lee. The Opposition Whip, Catherine Ong. The Government Reply, Mon Morelia. On behalf of the House, I extend a special welcome to everyone present. As your House clerks today, we, Lauren and Claire, are reminding you on the rules for the debate. After 1 minute of delivering the speech, I will clap once to indicate the POI is already open. After the 6th minute, I will clap again to indicate that POI is no longer allowed. 10 minutes before the 7th minute, I will clap multiple times to remind the speaker that his or her time is up. I now call upon the Prime Minister to introduce the motion, define the terms, and outline the government case.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. At the government side, we strongly support the motion that this House will restrict romantic relationships between university students who study within the same academic institution. Today, our cause is universities should have the authority to impose reasonable restriction when romantic relationships create conflicts of interest or threaten academic fairness. First, a romantic relationship refers to a close relationship between two people that goes beyond ordinary friendship and is generally recognized as dating or being partners. Second, according to Oxford Learner's Dictionary, restriction is to limit something rather than completely banning it. In our model, universities do not encourage or ban romantic relationships between students. Instead, they regulate situations where romantic relationships create conflicts of interest or threaten academic fairness. In other words, we regulate academic interactions, not private emotions. Universities may require reporting their relationship, avoid evaluating each other's work, or stay out of academic decisions involving one another when fairness may be affected. Third, we must understand what a university is. University is an institutional academic institution, a professional training environment, and a public educational space for students. So, our first main argument is universities are public educational institutions whose institutional responsibility is to protect academic fairness, equal opportunities, and the integrity of the learning environment. So, university can impose reasonable limitation on individual behaviors when it threatens these collective educational benefits. In fact, what we really discuss is not whether students can be allowed to have a romantic relationship at universities. The real conflict is between individual freedom and institutional responsibility. So, we know choosing to love someone is certainly an individual freedom. However, it should be limited in certain situations. For example, universities do not allow students unlimited freedom behaviors in classroom, such as treating prejudice when they threaten academic integrity. So, our question is, between institutional responsibility and individual freedom, how much limited should individual freedom have? That's why we gave the definition of restrict before. Mills principle states that the only for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So, university has a legitimate authority to set a reasonable limitation on individual freedom when necessary to protect collective benefits. Under this framework, our second main argument is romantic relationship within the same academic institution may harm academic fairness and trust within the learning environment. When two students are in a romantic relationship, they may unconsciously and unconsciously give preferential treatment to one another in group work, peer evaluations, and access to opportunities. Even if no rules are broken, our other students may still feel unfair, which can damage academic fairness and trust in the learning environment. This concern is also recognized by universities themselves. For example, universities such as Oxford already requires the declaration of cross-personal relationship, where conflicts of interest may arise. This shows that educational institutions recognize relationship-based conflicts may cause academic problems. In contrast, when institutions do not restrict romantic relationships, problems like favoritism and unequal treatment may happen. In some universities in the U.S., cases involving romantic relationships between members of the same academic institution has raised concerns about biased grading, unfair access to opportunities, and loss of public trust. This example shows that without clear boundary, institutional predictability and academic fairness can suffer. Finally, we suppose that universities should have the right to impose reasonable restrictions on romantic relationships within the same academic institution. Importantly, these measures are not only designed to protect other students' rights to fairness and equal opportunities, but also to protect the couples themselves from conflicts of interest and unnecessary pressure arising from their relationship in academic setting. No thanks. Moreover, creating a fair, just, and supportive learning environment for every student is one of the most fundamental responsibilities of universities. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The Prime Minister spoke for 5 minutes, 5 seconds. I now call upon the Leader of the Opposition to do his speech for 7 minutes.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We, the opposition, reject the idea that universities should restrict romantic relationships between students studying within the same institution. We strongly disagree that. We believe that university students are adults or mature individuals who have the right to make personal decisions about their personal lives. Before my speech about our arguments, I have some questions for the government. I think you mentioned about how many individual freedom. But what is freedom? Freedom does not mean they can do anything, whatever, good or bad. But it means that they have autonomy to manage their own life and make their own decisions for their personal life. And second, I think you also mean fairness. But I think this kind of situation, it can happen in any kinds of relationships. Point. No sense. Should universities also regulate friendships or other relationships to avoid these unfair things? I don't think so. I think it's unreasonable. And the third, I think Angela also mentioned conflict. But conflict, it's a thing. The problem is not the romantic relationships. It also can be happen in friendship or other relationships. And then I will talk about the first two arguments that focus on autonomy. First, restricting romantic relationships
violates students' personal autonomy and privacy. Romantic relationships are deeply personal and emotional choices that happen between mature individuals. University students are mature individuals, no sense, or completely adults who have ability to make decisions for their own lives and relationships. Therefore, universities have no moral authority to control or restrict or regulate those private or personal things. Universities should not be given the right or power to control or regulate romantic relationships. If they have the power, then beginning monitoring students' personal behavior and judging students' relationships cannot be avoided. Universities would extend their influence beyond its role as a place for study and growth. As a result, students lose their freedom of emotional autonomy and privacy. According to the research by Canada's team, autonomy is important to support students' happiness and mental health. If university restricts students' personal choice, such as romantic relationships or other something relationships, then they would break students' autonomy and mental health. Universities should not control students' personal lives as educational institutions. No sense. This restriction violates the human rights of students. Next, adults learn responsibility through freedom, not restriction. Universities often justify their restriction by claiming that they are protecting students because students will be harmed by bad decisions. It misunderstands how responsibility develops. According to Shadow's team, they found responsibility is from autonomy rather than external point.
You said this is university's responsibility. Do university have a responsibility to protect equal opportunities for all students? If the answer is yes, then why should the universities ignore reasonable treats to fairness? Can you speak again? Okay. Do university have a responsibility to protect equal opportunities for all students? If the answer is yes, then why should the universities ignore reasonable choice to fairness? Actually, I think protection from university should come through support, counseling, and education, not through restricting personal relationships. According to Shadow's team, they found relationships is from autonomy rather than from external control. Responsibility works together with freedom. Giving students full autonomy makes them more responsible for their choices, actions, or behaviors. And when students are allowed to have autonomy to make choices and experience the consequences of their choices, they become responsible. Responsibility cannot be developed in an environment where every important decision is controlled by an institution. Students cannot learn how to manage their relationships. According to Woodward's research paper, personal autonomy is important for students' development in many fields for transformative skills such as critical thinking, adaptability, and creativity. Universities is not only a place for academic learning, but also a period for personal growth. Students learn many skills such as making decisions, facing consequences, and learning from their experience. If universities remove students' opportunity about making decisions on other something that exercise their personal autonomy, then they limit the development of students' skills and abilities. University cannot make personal decisions for students. If they do that, then students cannot grow to be a mature and independent adult. Therefore, restricting romantic relationships not only violates students' rights, but also restrict their personal development. In conclusion, students as adults or mature individuals should be trusted and have autonomy to manage their personal relationships and accept the consequences of their personal decisions. Freedom encourages responsibility. Thank you.
thank you, Leader of the Opposition, for your remark. The Leader of the Opposition spoke for 7 minutes, 3 seconds. Now I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to give her rebuttal and additional. Now I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to give his rebuttal and additional arguments on the issue.
Good morning, everyone. So one thing that I would like to highlight from what the leader of the opposition said is that one of their arguments is that they talk about how these restrictions could really affect the students' personal life, and well, it could really damage them when you control over their private life. But you know, if it is an invasion for your personal life, you know, it's actually an instinctive argument, but also it proves too much. You know, autonomy is never unlimited inside a shared institution. Universities already restrict where students can go, how must they behave in class, what they can say in assessments, and how do they dress in classes. These are not seen as invasions of privacy or personal life because they serve a legitimate institutional purpose. Now, the question is whether these restrictions exist. Well, they always do. The question is whether this particular restriction is justified. Well, first of all, our side says yes. When a romantic relationship between students in the same class or in the same cohort deteriorates, it does not stay private anymore. It's built into shared tutorials, it's built into group project, lab partners, and dormitory common rooms. Now, at this point, it stops being a private matter and it becomes an institutional one. Secondly, universities already regulates enormous amount of behaviors that start as private. Noise in dormitories and private behavior. What you wear, no thank you. What you wear in class is a private behavior. How you speak to one another during an assessment is a private behavior. Now, all of these are regulated because they affect others in shared spaces. A romantic relationship that disrupts a shared academic cohort is no longer different in its principle. The president has already been set, and this policy fits comfortably with it. Now, talking about how it disrupts the environment, you know, the main argument that I would like to say is that the romantic relationship damages the collective learning environment itself. Now, let me paint a picture for you guys. Two students start dating. They are in the same course, the same seminar group, and then the relationship ends. And suddenly, the other students, these 10 other students, for example, are caught in the middle. Those 10 students now sit in a group where two people refuse to make eye contact.
Point.
Yes.
What principle allows the university to intervene in romantic relationship, but not other personal choices that may affect academic performance?
First of all, I would like to talk about a few things. We're trying to focus on romantic relationships. Therefore, for other regulations on personal life, I think it's very necessary to talk about right now, since it is about relationships. Let's continue. So imagine the situation that I just told you, and they're in a group where they spend more time managing the atmosphere in the room than actually doing the actual work they are being graded on. Nobody gave them a choice actually. This is what when they talk about the rights of I'm sorry. When we talk about these people that are affected outside of the relationship, I want to talk about how these students are actually uninvolved in the relationship, but they do bear some consequences from decisions they never really made. I want to talk about someone we have not talked about enough today. The student who is neither in the relationship nor the one who ended it, well, which is the third partner. When two students in the same academic cohort enter a romantic relationship, they make a decision that affects only themselves. But when a relationship creates tension, academic conflict, or a hostile group dynamic, the cost is paid by everyone around them. That is an unjust transfer of power to people who never consented to it. Here are the facts. A 2002 study by Lencioni on team dysfunction showed that personal conflict between two members of a small team is sufficient to break the trust and output the entire group, even if others have no personal stake in the conflict. This is directly applicable to the small academic cohorts. Now, research on peer learning by Booth and Cohen and Sampson in 1999 in the assessment of the evolution in the higher education journal found that peer relationships are the single largest variable in the quality of collaborative learning outcomes. When peer relationships are disputed by interpersonal conflict, the academic output of the whole group suffers, not just individuals involved. Now, a 2018 study report from Inside Higher Ed documented that students in a small degree program frequently reported anxiety, discomfort, and reduced academic engagement when close friends or classmates experienced relationship breakdowns. Because proximity in their group, in their program made it impossible to avoid the fallout, because proximity in their group program made it impossible to avoid the fallout. Now, according to UNESCO 2021, a report on the Future Education Equitable equitable learning conditions are a collective right, not an individual one. Every student has the right a right to an environment where their academic progress is held hostage by personal decisions of the people seated next to them. The opposition was people might say relationship can end badly outside the university too. And we do not regulate those. That is true, but those relationships do not force follow-up into mandatory seminar every Tuesday for 3 years. The difference is captivity. In a cohort, students cannot always walk away. They are institutionally bound to each other. That is what makes this situation unique and what makes regulation not just reasonable, but necessary. The government is not in the business of policing law. We are in the business of protecting the students who had never asked to be involved. That is what this policy does. And that is from me.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister spoke for 7 minutes, 3 seconds. I now call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to do his speech for 7 minutes.
So for the first part, about the academic unfairness or favoritism, I think university students naturally from various social relationships, including friendships, hometown and connections, club memberships, and roommate relationships. Following the government's logic, close friends, roommate, and club members may also help each other to cause academic unfairness. Does that mean universities should ban friendships as well? All of these relationships can lead to the sharing of information, opportunities, and resources. However, resource sharing itself does not automatically constitute unfairness. The purpose of a university is to create opportunities for students to learn, collaborate, and build meaningful connections, not to sever interpersonal relationships out of fear that they might be abused. If genuine unfair behavior occurs, such as favoritism, academic misconduct, or abuse of power, the university should punish the misconduct itself rather than restricting the relationships. We should regulate harmful actions, not prohibit normal human connections. And also, for the definition of restriction, before accepting the government's proposal, we must first ask, what exactly does restrict mean? If restriction includes punishment, disciplinary actions, or forcing students to end their relationships, then it is effectively a ban, all but none. Students are no longer genuinely free to choose because there are consequences attached to that choice. On the other hand, if restriction merely means giving advance recommendations or concealing students against dating, then it does little to solve the harms that the government claims exist. Students who wish to be in the relationships can simply ignore such guidance. Therefore, the government is trapped in a dilemma. If the restriction is mild, it will be ineffective. If the restriction is severe, it becomes indistinguishable from a prohibition. As a way, the policy fails to justify itself. And also, university could easily just restrict many other aspects of students' life using the same logic. They could limit friendship because friends may distract students from studying. They could prohibit participants in clubs because extracurricular activities consume time and may affect academic performance. The problem is that once we allow institutions to interfere with personal choices, whether there is a potential risk, there is no clear principle that stops further restrictions. Universities are educational institutions, not guardians of every aspect of students' individual lives. As long as students...
Okay, you mentioned that we restrict students' private choice, right? So, is our model regulate private emotional regulating academic interactions affected by those emotions? Is our model regulating private emotions or regulating academic interactions affected by those emotions?
Students' emotions?
I mean, is our model restricted private emotions or the emotion resulted academic interactions?
Okay. So, if the romantic will affect the students' performance, I want to ask, where is the boundary between university's roles and students' private life? If the university said that, well, it is good for you, and then does that mean that university can control the students all in his life? And before me to my extension, let me briefly review our first argument. Our leader has already demonstrated that university students are adults who deserve autonomy over their personal relationships. Universities should educate and guide students, not control their private lives. We have also shown that responsibility is developed through freedom and experience, not through institution restrictions. So our leader has already demonstrated that why this restriction is unjustified. I will further prove that it is also no use and may even cause worse consequences. I prove that restriction also creates secrecy and harm. Restriction does not remove romance, it only hides it. Imagine two young people at the stage of life when romantic feelings are at their strongest. Do you really believe they would simply give up on a relationship because of a student role? Absolutely not. Such restrictions may force relationships underground, but they will not eliminate them. Masker found that when young people anticipate disapproval or punishment, they are more likely to conceal their relationships rather than end them. As a result, students hide their relationships, lie to authorities, avoid seeking guidance, and engaging in secret dating instead of maintaining healthy and transparent relationships. This secrecy also creates real harms. Students facing emotional conflicts are less likely to seek support. To avoid their detection, they may meet at inappropriate hours, affecting their routines and studies. Hidden relationships are much harder to supervise than open ones. When a relationship is public, friends, roommates, and mentors can provide guidance, identify unhealthy behavior, and offer support when problems arise. As a result, these risks are not removed by restriction. They just become harder to detect and more likely to lead to serious consequences. Restriction, therefore, does not solve the problem. It just will hide it and also cause worse consequences.
Thank
I now call upon the government to deliver his speech rebuttals and clash point analysis. Please be reminded that you are not allowed to provide new arguments.
So, good morning, distinguished educators, fellow debaters, and audience. At the heart of this debate is understanding that the opposition has deliberate courage. They want this House to believe that the government is trying to ban relationships or decide that if students are allowed to or not should be allowed to have relationships within their age of developing to adulthood, and say that it lacks freedom, but simply being optimistic is not always the case. Our position is far more narrow and far more reasonable. We are in the line that states that restriction but not total abolition of rules and practices of the institution. Ladies and gentlemen, in our advocacy, we believe that when our romantic relationships exist within an academic environment and that relationship begins to compromise the learning experience, assessment process, academic welfare of other students, the university must have the authority to intervene. So before that, I want to repeat that what the opposition has said. So since the Prime Minister, you say that freedom should not be oppressed, but educating them, but they will just be taught that every relationship comes with restriction. So, because romantic relationships itself have restrictions, they have a consistent mutually understanding of what their boundaries are. If so, they cheat, they are breaking their restriction. That's where the protection is. And it's a good thing to regulate the behaviors of the students there. Also, for the question earlier, restriction is only a solution. Why does it need to be opposed? Because something had happened already, and that's why there is a need for restriction problem. So you cannot ensure that only good things will happen in a relationship. So I will continue in my argument. The first point that I want to address is the opposition has spent this debate arguing that something we never opposed. We did not come here to ban love. We did not come here to tell students who they are allowed to feel something for. We did come here to students. The word in this motion is restricted. It is our first speaker established in Oxford restrict meaning to limit the range of something, not to eliminate it entirely. Universities already operate on this logic every single day. Students cannot plagiarize if they choose to. They cannot disrupt a lecture, they cannot behave without consequence inside a shared academic space. None of it is considered a ban of thinking or a ban of having opinions. It is a boundary that exists because the institution has a responsibility to everyone inside it. But we are proposing follows the exact same principle. The position arguing against a total ban that nobody proposed, and this House should not be easily avoided. Because universities are not merely social places, they are institutions entrusted with delivering education fairly. This precisely relationships within environments carry risks that private relationships, when they start to disrupt academic integrity, carry conflict that affect the surroundings when are not handled or regulated properly. Members of this House, our concern is not simply that students are not entering romantic relationships. Our concern is that the measurable impact of those relationships can have academic performance. And by extension, of the students who are dependent on one another within academic university environment. A great cure is not the solution, but an intervention. So, to my second point, inclusivity means everyone gets a fair fight. An exclusive academic environment is not the one that protects only the most visible people in the room. Is where every student, regardless who they are sitting next to what is happening between their group mates and an equal fair chance to perform on the basis of their effort and their ability alone. A 2025 study by Raza in the Journal Science, Asian Development Studies found that romantic distractions is a measurable predictor of lower academic performance, and its consequences do not stay within the individual. They spread across the group through missed deadlines, conscious participation, and collapsed communication. Field and college found that breakup distress causes anxiety and collapsed communication. And society withdrawal that suddenly students carry directly to collaborative academic settings. When that happens inside a mentor cohort, the students who have worked the hardest prepared most and ask for nothing except a fair assessment now competes on an uneven surface that they not create and cannot create. Yes, can you see?
You talk a lot about limitation, but you never tell us how will you limit and how are you going to regulate the relationships in the university.
How we are going to regulate it, because there's restriction already, and we are trying to tell you that there are boundaries that needs to be not to be crossed. And for instance, like sexual intercourse, that should be not allowed within the. And carry on with my argument. We need to say this plainly that not everyone has the same access to college education. For many students, getting here was not given. There are students in institutions whose parents work multiple jobs. Stress, budgets, and carry financial burdens quietly so that their children could sit in a classroom. There are students who took out loans they would spend years in paying. There are students from whom a single family semester is not in confidence for a crisis. When the collaborative environment inside the cohort collapses because of romantic conflict they had no part in, the cost is not falling, it falls hardest on these afford for anything to go wrong. Fairness is not just about equal rules on paper, it is about equal conditions in practice, and arguably romantic conflict inside the shared academic unit makes the conditions unequal for students who sacrifice themselves. So, you say that freedom is the best choice, and then you mentioned that personal choice is the best. But so we are talking about here that restriction is only application of what can be a good foreseeable circumstances. So I want to ask you a question. What if the couple have a baby? Because if they do, it affects their studies and learning experience in school, and that reminds that the learning experience of the student, and that is saying that is not undermining that every student will choose that path, but there are some, and that's why we are doing this application as restriction as protection. So as my last point, in concluding, is about recognizing the need for policies and regulation. We as the House Standard here's answer for conflict and birth control that they deem to threat the institution, but they have no answers to resolve this matter since they agree that ideal love is boundless, but realistically, everything is tied down by something wherever there is always a force to bring them. Ladies and gentlemen, for this motion, we are saying that the civil is finest achievable through good measurement of governance in a false sense of government is a rest statement.
Thank you, Government Whip. The Government Whip spoke for 7 minutes, 17 seconds. And now call upon the Whip of the Opposition to do her speech for 7 minutes.
The assumption that romantic relationships create risks, such as academic dishonesty, favoritism, and declining academic performances, are what the government has been blindly arguing about. However, throughout the debate, they failed to prove why these risks justify restricting the freedom of all students, just because some relationship cause this. And you are talking about the students who are grown adults. The government has said that our leader said the experience and the consequences of their choice, but our leader never said that, and she said it only happens. Not only good things happens, but consequences cannot be avoided actually. If students don't face this decision and the consequences, they do not learn to grow, and what if they leave university? What if they go to workplace? How and where and who will teach them? How will they learn about these things? And the government talks a lot about limiting the relationship in the universities. But they never give us solutions on how they will limit and how they will maintain this limitation throughout university life and throughout the years of the university and other coming university students. The government talked about, the Deputy Prime Minister also said personal autonomy has no place in legitimate institutions. How and why is that correct? That is against human rights. And remember, university students are grown adults. We are not talking about children in their primary school or in their secondary school. The Deputy Prime Minister also said relationship is not private. What students choose to wear and express is what they choose to wear and express is private, but not their relationship. But our leader has fully demonstrated and told us that relationship is the most deeply and personal, intimate, consensual relationship that two grown adults are having. And the government never proved that relationship distribute academics yet. distributes academic life, yet they continue to blindly say and talk about this. Oh, thank you. And on academic misconduct, the government argues that romantic partners are more likely to help each other or even cheat. But cheating or helping each other is already prohibited. Academic dishonesty is already prohibited by university regulations. Universities have mechanisms to investigate and to punish academic dishonesty when it occurs. The problem is misconduct itself. It is not the existence of romantic relationship. If we accept the government's ridiculous logic, then universities should also restrict friendship, roommates, and group works and club memberships, because these relationships can also facilitate cheating or helping each other, or the word they like to use, academic misconduct. This is clearly unreasonable at all. Now let us look at what we as the opposition has successfully proven. Our leader of opposition demonstrated that romantic relationships are deeply personal between consulting adults. University exists to educate students, not to govern every aspect of their private lives. If they do so, they are extending their authority far beyond education and into personal freedom. This is not the role of the academic institution. The government never gave us a convincing reason why universities should possess this level of control over adult students. Our leader also showed that responsibility develops through autonomy. Students become responsible adults when they are allowed to make choices, experience consequences, and learn from these experiences. The government model treats university students as if they are incapable of making their own decision, but our model treats them as an adult capable of growth. Yes, go ahead.
So, if independence does not mean best choices, then why are there therapists? How can you ensure that they will not repeat their bad choices if it affects the collective benefit of the school, the tuition?
I'm sorry, can you go again?
So independence does not mean best choices. That is why there are therapists, there are coaches, there are regulations. How can you ensure that they will not repeat their choices that goes along with their freedom, their personal value, and the collective process it affects how the students are in the university itself, like the classmates.
Bad things happen all the time. Your friendship, you fight with your roommate, you fight with your parents, your financial difficulties, everything happens all the time. Romantic relationship is not the only thing that you can regulate. If you were talking about if they happen and if we don't regulate, then why don't we regulate friendship? As we said, why don't we ban everything? Yes, go ahead.
You talk about why we shouldn't regulate friendship and other stuff besides romantic relationship. We all know that friendship is also a relationship, but it is far different than what a romantic relationship is. That's why it has certain regulations, and also the dynamics of a romantic relationship.
Our deputy leader proved that restrictions do not eliminate romantic relationships, but when people do not suddenly stop having feelings because we restrict them, they will happen in hindrance. Students will hide their relationship, and it will grow like mold under the rug. The risks you fear, the government fear, will not disappear, and they will simply become harder to detect and harder to address. Therefore, the policy is ineffective at all. Our deputy leader also demonstrated that restriction undermines trust between institutions such as the university that you are talking about. Universities function best when students trust them, not trust them and see them as a guidance, and not as a surveillance of control, which will surely damage the educational environment if we do so. If students fear that they will be controlled, and if you are being, if they feel like you are controlled, and if they feel like if their autonomy is taken away, they will not trust universities anymore. At the end of this debate, there are three major questions. Which sides better respect individual rights? We as the opposition talks about the human rights are given when they have full autonomy, but the government has fully failed to acknowledge that the autonomy, these grown adults that goes into university are grown adults, and that they should have high autonomy over their own private lives. To conclude, we as the opposition has given out so many points and raised so many questions according to their solutions and the limitation that they're going to make. They never answered it. But we, as the opposition, strong firmly on our claims and our arguments, and we would like to take this motion. We are proud to oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Opposition Whip. The Opposition Whip spoke for 8 minutes 20 seconds. I now call upon the reply of the Opposition to do his speech for 4 minutes. Remember that you are not allowed to give any other argument.
Dear adjudicators, the government has stood you before today and attempted to completely shrink the boundaries of this debate.
Take it.
Dear adjudicators, the government has stood before you today and attempted to completely shrink the boundaries of this debate. Recognizing that their back is against the wall, they have watered down the motion, defining restrict as a minor, harmless academic limitations. As a matter of fact, they haven't said anything major about their claims, like how they were going to limit it. The only thing they really talked about that made sense was academic fairness. And since we're going that way, this is what I'm going to say. They want you to believe that their model is a harmless compromise. We tell you that by shrinking their definition, they have created a policy that is an absolute nightmare of arbitrary enforcement and a direct penalty on student success. I have 3 points that I wanted to say. But since they haven't said anything like how they're going to limit it, thus I only have 2. First, let us address the nightmare of arbitrary enforcement. The government claims they will only apply limits where it matters. But we ask the critical practical question. Who gets to draw the line? And where does it start? How does an administrator define a relationship? Does a limitation apply after a first date? After a casual hookup? Or only after 6 months of commitment? To enforce these minor limits, university staff must cross an acceptable ethical line and become relationship inspectors. Judging the seriousness of student affection, this creates an unstable, unpredictable environment where rules are applied arbitrarily based on campus gossip. You cannot protect academic standards using a system built on arbitrary guesswork. Second, look at how this actively penalizes student success. The government claims their limitations are harmless, but let us look at the tangible harm of what they're proposing. If 2 top-tier, high-ambitious students in the same specialized major fall in love, the government's model dictates that the university must limit them. This means 1 or both of these students must be forced out of their preferred research lab, barred from competitive seminars, or one of those students can be a TA, or also detached from specific thesis mentored just to avoid a social overlap. Dear adjudicators, this does not protect students. It actively sabotages their academic and career trajectories. Because the penalty for being open about a relationship is so incredibly high, losing your academic opportunities, students will simply choose to hide their love. You do not eliminate the overlap. You just guarantee that it remains hidden, unmanaged, and unregulated. The opposition case stands for true real-world maturity, privacy, and academic freedom. And that's why we are proud to take this win. Thank you.
Thank you, opposition reply. The opposition reply spoke for 3 minutes 5 seconds. I now call upon the last speaker, reply of the government, to do her speech for 4 minutes. Remember that you are not allowed to give another argument.
Let's see. Before I summarize our case, let me first address the central narrative presented by the opposition. Throughout this debate today, the opposition side has mainly spoken about restrictions are unnecessary because they actually have many causes from the relationships can cause students academic problems. And second, they are mentioned that about the individual freedom and privacy and social development. So to reply their opposition, the opposition's questions. The first, the opposition side repeatedly talk about individual freedom, yet they never explain why one student's freedom should outweigh another student's right to the fair academic environment. Second, they mention the relationship has friendship many caused by the friendship mechanism, and they mention the friendship many times. So to reply this, not every problem is a relationship problem, but relationship problems are uniquely positioned to disrupt academic collaboration. And the third, more importantly, the opposition never answered why universities should simply ignore these foreseeable risks when they directly affect students' educational outcomes. And finally, as our leader already mentioned about the definition of the restriction, which means we don't ban the students to end the relationships, but we just to help them to protect their relationships during their university life. And however, this framing fundamentally disputes wrong assumption that the interests and the choices of the individuals in the relationships should take priority over the interests of the wider academic community. The government rejects that assumption. To talk about the romantic relationship, we, the government, has never argued that banning that what I mentioned before, students to fall in love or controlling students' freedom. We repeatedly claim that we accept the romantic relationships in universities with reasonable restrictions to limit and avoid the negative impacts, not prohibition. Our purpose of the restriction is for protect the students who study and live in the community. And ladies and gentlemen, universities are not merely social spaces. It is a public place for students to achieve their academically success and grow their personal capability up. Consider the motion. The core conflict is should institutional responsibility stands on individual freedom rather than the collective learning environment. The opposition says yes, but we says no, because we have consistently demonstrated three areas of harm that the opposition has failed to address. First, we mentioned that universities are built upon equal opportunities and impartial assessment. However, romantic relationships within the same academic environment can create conflicts of interest, favoritism, and unequal treatment. And the second, we explained the romantic relationships is very significant affects students' emotional stability, motivation, and academics. Lastly, universities do not operate through isolated individuals. So, members of the House, the government believes that freedom has never meant the absence of relationships. Rather, freedom exists alongside responsibility. And when the exercise of individual freedom begins affecting the rights, welfare, and educational exercise of others, universities are justified in imposing reasonable and proportionate restrictions. For these reasons, the government side has demonstrated not only why this policy is justified, but also why it is necessary, effective, and proportionate. Therefore, we are proud to stand with this motion, and we firmly believe the government wins this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Government reply. The government reply spoke for 5 minutes, 1 second. And on behalf of the House, I thank everyone for the cooperation. I congratulate all the debaters on their performances. This debate is now concluded. The House stands adjourned.